Hi YouTube! I've got my friend Veronica with me.
So my name's Veronica. I work in human resources with Rosie. We're colleagues, co-workers.
Yeah.
And I've been living in France for 3 years now.
Your history with France, or at least French, extends a little bit longer, right?
I started learning French in middle school, studied all through high school, and then actually majored in it, so it was one of my degrees as an undergrad in the US.
Yeah. And we wanted to do a video today really on how it feels to be an American living in France, and particularly living in Paris. Definitely an interesting relationship between the French and the Americans from what I perceive, not being either. I can see there's a funny dynamic going on. I think you were saying, right, there's been a long history between the two.
Yep, France has been America's longest ally and first ally, going way back to like 1778.
Yeah, it's almost like, I see it almost sibling kind of rivalry. There's like a love-hate thing going on. We're gonna talk about that a little bit today because it's really interesting how those kind of cliches translate into what people actually live and experience when they come to a new country. When you introduce yourself, you know, as, hi, I'm Veronica, I'm from America, what's the general first reaction of people?
To be honest, I would hesitate even mentioning where I was from unless someone asked, but usually I wouldn't start with that as like the go-to, and then once we've gotten a feel for each other, maybe I'll say, oh yeah, I'm actually American, because I would attempt to first have a conversation in French rather than English, and therefore people would say, oh, you sound Spanish, or oh, are you from Russia? You know, there's always no one could ever quite figure it out.
Why were you kind of not so forthcoming with that?
Yeah, to be honest, I knew the stereotype that French people had of Americans, and I didn't want to immediately fall into that category of, wow, she's a typical American cliche, or that people assume that that's how I'm going to act in the future, and to build an opinion after having gotten to know me.
And what do you think the cliches, I mean the real cliches are that French people have about America?
Like, I mean, some of the cliches that I really do think are correct. People in the US or Americans, even when they're abroad, are quite friendly. They can start up a conversation with anyone. You don't have to necessarily know each other to have a, you know, full-on conversation, even if you don't build a, you know, deep, profound friendship after that. You can very commonly, you know, run into an American, have like an hour or two chat at a coffee shop or in the bus, and it's totally normal. The smiling as well, I think, is totally normal if you're an American first moving to France, which was a huge thing that I always did, and I've toned that down a bit. And just being just openly friendly and not being always suspicious of other people's motives, but you're just openly willing to help,
and there's no underlying reason behind. They're not trying to scam you. They're just
it's just being nice and trying to help, and that was something that I think is true, and I think that's what French people typically think of Americans. I can't say 100% of Americans, but in general.
Do you feel like there's parts of your personality that you've toned down living here in order to fit the mold a little bit?
Yes, so after having lived in France for maybe like 4 or 5 months, and I was getting kind of feedback from other French people that I was getting to know either at work or in my social life, and they were, you know, saying, oh, you're too friendly, you're smiling too much, you're sugary.
Sugary?
Yep, I've been called a sugary American. And at some point I was like, gosh, you know, I should really kind of reevaluate my approach. I really try to be less friendly, definitely not smiling at strangers in the street, because that just attracts unwanted attention for all the wrong reasons.
Oh yeah, in Paris at least.
In Paris for sure. And there are moments, even today, 3 years later, I sometimes get excited about something and then I forget, like, oh, you know, no one else is speaking as loudly as I am. But the looks see it all, like, that's all you need. But as well, the superficiality of how we communicate, how we express ourselves.
It's amazing.
Yeah, everything.
This is the cliche. It's amazing.
Yeah, the hyperboles and just everything is grand and magnificent, and if something is like it's funny when I hear like pas mal. When I first heard that in French, it was, you know, it's actually quite good. Yeah. Whereas like in English, when you translate that, pas mal is like not bad, but you know, it actually means like it's probably terrible, you know?
Imagine if you were telling a child like, oh, what you did today was not bad.
Yeah, pas mal.
I mean, in the workplace, I was also told myself like to maybe smile less. That's almost associated with being, they can't take you seriously.
Right,
if you're too nice, it's like succeeding in business. those things don't really mix.
Yeah, I was like, it's always worked for me up until now.
Yeah,
This is like all the opposite advice.
Have you ever had any kind of like negative experiences? Like,
yeah, so now that I've been here 3 years, I've kind of seen the whole range yeah, of reactions to this. So yes, I agree. Like at work, I had a lot of that kind of feedback from French managers. And then in my personal relationships, you know, when I'm starting to meet more and more French people, yeah, they'll be like, oh wow, like they're actually intrigued, they want to know more. And sometimes I'll get questions like, is it really like, do you really have like cheerleaders and football players? Like, did you really have lockers? And I'm like, yeah, like to be honest, some of those things are actually quite true. Maybe they're a bit exaggerated in films, but yeah. But most of the time I was actually pleasantly surprised in knowing that most people are intrigued and they want to know more and they're curious, and usually they won't start the conversation with assuming that there's a stereotype, but rather what is my take and is it true? And
oh nice,
yeah,
that's good. So they're wanting to hear the reality,
the other side. Yeah.
Overall, I mean, life as an American living in France, how have you seen yourself change for the better, and how have you seen yourself, you know, maybe on the other side, have you had to give anything up that you used to really appreciate?
Okay. So it's funny because the longer I live in Paris or in France, you know, the more I realize just how American I am. Yes, now when a French person says, oh, Americans sometimes can be superficial, and actually I'll say it's not maybe superficiality, but it's the fact that, yeah, they're open to starting a conversation, maybe being friendly, but that doesn't mean they're actually your friend, and that we're actually more similar to the French than we'd like to admit. But French people as well, you know, they take a long time before they really call you a friend.
Yeah.
And Americans, I think, would say the same. We're just more open to that initial conversation and more open to creating those relationships. But at the end of the day, I think an American wouldn't say that you're a best friend any faster than a French person would. The hugging, I used to be a total, like, that's just so common. It's just how you greet your friends, and I'm just like, oh, don't touch me, like, you know, of course it quickly comes back, but it's one of those things like I'm ready for the bees and I keep my, you know, distance. And it's so funny because when I first moved to Paris, I thought, wow, the bees, like, it's very intimate. In reality, like, all the French people were like, well, no, like, hugging is like bodily contact. Like, as well, you know, I think in comparison to French people, I'm quite loud, but when I go back to the US, I'm like, wow, everyone is just screaming. Nobody needs to hear our conversation, but that's just kind of the thing that strikes me every time. It amazes me how friendly and how helpful Americans want to be, even to complete and total strangers. And every time I go back to the US, it's something that shocks me. I was in New York a few months ago and I had run out of money on my Metro pass or my subway pass, and someone right behind me was like, oh honey, don't worry, like, let me pay for it. And he just scanned his card for me, and it was just, he had no reason to, he didn't know me, we had no prior contact, but it was just so nice. And like, I was like struggling with my luggage to get through, like, that was just, it just puts a smile on my face, and it kind of reassures me. And it's just unfortunate, but those are the kinds of things that you'll never really see in Paris, or very rarely see. And they're things that I really miss. And to be honest, the quality of life that I have in France doesn't even compare to what I would probably have in the US in terms of healthcare and holidays and work-life balance. And it's amazing though that in the US, there's, yes, this optimism, this positive energy all the time. Things could be just terrible and we still find kind of the light at the end of the tunnel no matter what. Whereas in France, we're immediately ready to complain or
say no.
Or say no.
Yeah, you get told no a lot. Yeah, it's not possible, we can't do that, not my job.
Yeah, and then the portions of the food.
Okay, yeah,
that really gets me every time I go home. I'm like, I get so used to my small portions in France, and when I go back and like I'll go to the movies, you know, with friends, and I'll have this giant bucket of popcorn that's literally like maybe 10 times the size of my stomach, I'm sure. Yeah, so the portions just, you know, shock me every time we go out to eat.
If you were to move back to the States, what aspects of French life would you like to take with you?
So there's three things, I guess. So for one, the healthcare, of course. I think that's something that I just feel so at ease being in Paris and knowing that I don't have to worry about whether I choose between like paying my rent or paying for my healthcare. Yeah. I do know that if I ever go back to the US and work there, I will miss the holidays. I think I've gotten so used to having 38 days a year now, and having time in the summer, time in the spring, time in the fall. The travel aspect as well, I have more time to visit other countries. And then finally is the quality of the food. I really love the food in France. It's such good quality and it's so diverse, and just, you know, just the cheese alone will get you. So now that I've had the experience of, you know, being newly arrived, and now I've gone through the school and education system and now work. Yes, in the beginning I really tried to kind of conform to the norms here, but at the end of the day you realize that you are who you are, and I feel really blessed and really lucky to say that I do have some French friends. It's nice that they accept me for who I am. Sometimes they even want to speak English and rather than French, and so it's nice that I have found some people that allow me to be completely myself, and you don't have to become the typical Parisian woman would be to be able to find your niche and a group of people that accept you for who you are.
That's cool. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, thank you for having me.
What do you guys think? Are you American? Do you live in France? Have you visited? Have you had any sort of shocks or about the questions you were asked, or maybe the perceptions? Let us know in the comments down below. We will be reading those and seeing what you guys have to say. But until then, we'll see you in the next video.
A bientôt.
Bye.